Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring a pretty radical idea about how human knowledge survives time. We usually assume civilization survives just by piling up facts, right? Like hoarding information. But what if that's completely backwards? What if civilization actually survives by remembering its mistakes? We're going to dive into a fascinating framework called the grammar of elimination, looking at how humanity preserves what specifically doesn't work just to protect our future. So imagine humanity is trapped in the world's absolute longest escape room. It's kind of like a giant multi-generational video game. But here's the catch. Nobody gets to restart, the instruction manual is constantly catching fire, and you eventually have to hand the controller off to the next player. People keep trying different paths, and reality, well, it leaves some very harsh reviews. Sometimes things literally explode, and we learn these hard lessons. So the real challenge is, how do we stop the next player from opening the exact same dangerous door? The brilliant mathematician Emmy Noether once pointed out that her methods of working and thinking have crept in everywhere anonymously. And that captures our core theme perfectly. The methods we use to eliminate impossible paths, whether we're talking about complex math, physics, or even ancient history, they operate universally. They're the hidden architecture of how we learn. We narrow down what's possible by rigorously identifying what is definitely not. Now, to understand why this matters, we really have to talk about the ultimate enemy of memory, entropy. And entropy isn't just, your bedroom getting messy. In a physical and civilizational sense, it's the constant threat of losing structure. Think about it. There are millions of ways to ruin a bridge, or a legal system, or even a birthday cake, right? But there are very, very few ways to keep them perfectly organized. Without continuous constraint and active correction, organized patterns just naturally become damaged, dispersed, or totally lost over time. Which brings us to our master key for fighting entropy, the grammar of elimination. This is the recurring process where reality eliminates failed possibilities and civilization does the heavy lifting of actually preserving those boundaries. We don't inherit all possibilities. We inherit the results of previous failures. By passing down warnings, laws, and proofs, you and I inherit a much more disciplined set of choices, so we just don't have to start from scratch. To see how this builds on Claude Shannon's famous information theory, think about a maze with, say, 10,000 doors. Shannon showed how we transmit information. But here's the thing, simply saving everything is basically useless. Saving information means documenting every single door. But saving eliminations, that means labeling only the doors that lead to lava. A warehouse full of every idea anyone's ever had is just noise. And honestly, a great way to get the next generation burned. Civilization thrives by keeping the differences that actually keep us safe. And this leads us to a recurring cycle that continually reduces our search space. The really remarkable claim here is that this exact same pattern of the grammar of elimination appears literally everywhere, across biology, law, mathematics, experimental science, and even ancient history. It's a universal cycle of error and memory that fundamentally reshapes what becomes accessible to us in the future. Let's break down how this actually works. First up, there's variation. Multiple choices exist. Then, reality applies constraint. Next, you get failure when a path collides with that constraint. But crucially, there must be recognition. Someone has to actually notice why it failed. That leads to elimination, basically removing the bad path. Then comes preservation, writing it down or making a rule. And finally, this all leads to a reduced future search. A local failure is converted into a durable boundary, which totally spares future generations the cost of rediscovering the fire. To see how humanity encoded this historically, let's look at 4 ancient case studies from Genesis, treating them as our earliest preserved warnings. Case Study 1. Adam and the First Boundary. When we look at the Adam narrative, it isn't simply a story about grabbing a piece of fruit. It's actually humanity's oldest recorded warning about boundaries. It illustrates that human freedom exists within a reality that is already ordered. When a boundary is violated, it permanently alters human accessibility to the future. Reality has rules, and ignoring them doesn't change the rules. It just creates catastrophic consequences. It's essentially the ultimate don't touch the hot stove story, preserved so we wouldn't have to learn it the hard way every single time. Case Study 2. Cain and relational failure. So if Adam's story is about the boundary of reality itself, Cain's story introduces the physical danger of human rivalry. The text preserves this profound relational failure. Cain kills his brother out of jealousy. But the deeper lesson preserved here is that violence doesn't just remove one person, it permanently collapses an entire future search space of relationships, descendants, and possibilities. And what's super fascinating is that Cain's lineage actually goes on to build cities and invent metallurgy. The text preserves this detail specifically to warn us that technical progress absolutely does not automatically cure relational violence. You can build a great city and still have a totally broken society. Cain famously asks, "Am I my brother's keeper?" He's attempting to deny responsibility, but the narrative completely refuses this evasion. God tells him that his brother's blood is literally crying out from the ground. The blood acts as the ultimate physical trace of failure. It's an eliminative lesson telling every subsequent generation, yes, you are responsible for the people in your relational field. You just cannot treat others as obstacles to be removed without damaging the very ground you stand on. And this perfectly illustrates how memory actually becomes physical. Whether it's encoded in Emmy Noether's mathematical formulas or literally built into the stained glass of religious institutions, civilization builds memory right into its architecture. A cathedral window telling a cautionary tale, or a math proof eliminating a contradiction, they exist to carry the reproof of the past directly into the present, making sure the boundaries we've learned stay visible. Case Study 3, Noah and Deliberate Preservation. Now, the story of Noah addresses what happens when a society's violence becomes so incredibly normalized that standard correction just fails completely. Before the flood, humanity's technical capacity expanded, but their moral constraints didn't. Violence became environmental. So the story teaches us that when a civilization's corruption outpaces its memory, preservation can no longer be accidental. It must become deliberate, architectural, and highly measurable. Noah doesn't just survive, he builds a specific, constrained vessel to carry a carefully selected set of life through a total civilizational collapse. Look at the precise engineering required for this. It means constructing physical boundaries before the catastrophe actually hits. It requires storing food, because preservation takes real maintenance through time. It demands ecological diversity. And crucially, Noah doesn't just fling the doors open the second the rain stops, right? He sends a dove to measure when the outside world is actually viable for re-entry. It shows that preservation is entirely useless if you don't wait for hard evidence that reality is ready. Case Study 4, Babel and Coordinated Danger. Our final case study presents a totally different problem. Not a collapse into violent chaos, but massive, unchecked human coordination. The builders of Babel had one language and standardized bricks. But centralization and standardized communication, when you don't have moral constraint, it creates a terrifying vulnerability. The ability to industrialize catastrophic errors. They weren't building just to build. They were building to make a name for themselves, centering their entire identity on concentrated power rather than grounded relationships. A shared language lowers the friction for collective action, which, sure, is great for building, but it's terrible if your goal is deeply flawed. By centralizing everything just to avoid dispersion, they actually made their system incredibly fragile. So the narrative presents an eliminative intervention, confusing their language. By breaking the communication network, the disastrous path was stopped cold before it could be completed. It's a profound lesson. Sometimes, a breakdown in coordination is exactly what saves a civilization from itself. The reduced future search. Stepping back from all these ancient narratives, we finally arrive at the overarching thesis of how we actually inherit the future. Civilization doesn't simply hand us a pile of accumulated facts. It gives us an accumulated search. Every single preserved law, technical standard, and historical warning represents someone else paying the heavy, heavy price of discovering that a certain path leads to ruin. The deepest inheritance of civilization isn't just knowing what to do. It is the institutional memory of what not to do, which allows us to build safely without paying the cost of past mistakes. Which leaves us with a final pretty provocative thought. As we navigate our rapidly advancing, highly coordinated modern world, which failed paths and dangerous doors is our current civilization forgetting to preserve? When we lose our institutional memory, we risk reopening doors that reality has already slammed shut. Understanding the grammar of elimination isn't just about reading history. It's about making sure we don't have to repeat it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.